When the Pharisees heard that he had silenced the Sadducees, they gathered together, and one of them, a lawyer, asked him a question to test him. "Teacher, which commandment in the law is the greatest?" He said to him, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the greatest and the first commandment. And the second is like it. You shall love your neighbour as yourself. On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets." And a second is like it. It was only when I sat down to see what today's gospel reading was that I really noticed these 6 little words, seemingly for the first time, though, of course, probably like you, I have, of course, read and heard them many, many times before. It's really just that I hadn't noticed them. I think the reason that I might not have noticed them before is partly because they serve as a kind of word filler between the 2 commandments that Jesus is quoting. It seems that Jesus was being novel in how they were put together, for certainly no other rabbi has been recorded as having done so before him. But it drew me to look a little closer at the 2 commandments and their relationship to one another. The former, to love your God with all your heart, soul and mind, is recorded in the book of Deuteronomy, and it is believed to have always been included in Jewish daily prayer, prayers that are collectively known as the Shema. As such, it would have been well known by all Jews, as common to them then as the Lord's Prayer is to us today. The latter commandment is, of course, Matthew's retelling of Jesus' quoting the Golden Rule, and it is a precept that has existed since ancient Egyptian times. It has traversed the globe and been a feature of pretty much every world religion, in every place and in every time. Our oldest record of this as an ethical principle goes back to some 2,000 years before Christ. It was known to the ancient pharaohs of the early Egyptian dynasties, for example. And in this case, Jesus was quoting actually from the book of Leviticus, only some 700-800 years beforehand. In other words, nothing of what Jesus was quoting was new. In fact, far from it. He was linking 2 ancient but separate concepts, both of them familiar for many hundreds of years before he quoted them. But how is the Golden Rule like the first, the one to love our God with all our heart, mind and soul? Other than their mutual age, they really are quite dissimilar. One mandates to the need to put God at the centre of our lives and to love him. The other mandates an ethic of personal reciprocity. One requires a devotion to the divine, but the latter really does not. In fact, the Golden Rule has been upheld as the central tenet of modern liberal humanism, demonstrating how far from its religious roots the principle has actually travelled. So why did Jesus bring these 2 seemingly disparate elements from 2 different books together as he did? The fact that all 4 Gospel accounts record this, albeit with different interpretations and emphases, gives confidence in the importance of him doing so. I suspect that it might be that it epitomises a life orientated to doing God's will. That doing so is the essence of a character of living that God looks for in his covenantal peoples. And then again, I do also wonder about the order of them, requiring the link words "and a second is like it" that drew my attention earlier, requiring those to separate them. Is it that the love of God is first, and then the loving of our neighbour can follow? Perhaps the implication is that whilst the 2 do go rather well together, the second is only really possible in a practical and sustainable lived-out reality as a consequence of the first. And just in case we run away with ourselves, let's note the boundaries placed around both. That we must commit and love God as far only as our minds and bodies are able. And similarly that we must love our neighbour so far as the natural care and love we would have for ourselves, as far as that permits. The boundaries make it possible for us to achieve them. So if the love of God is needed to sustain the love of neighbour, and the love of neighbour is the outcome of the love of God, And it seems to me that they really are actually both sides of the same coin, both restrained by our human limitations, but one needing and requiring the other. And having thought about it a bit further, it's clear that the second law, despite its first appearances to be rather dissimilar and different, does seem to be rather like the first after all.